Hello and welcome to this special interview on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Now, during the past week, we've heard the US President-elect Donald Trump suggesting that he'd consider using military force to gain control of the Panama Canal and Greenland, as well as economic force to acquire Canada. Well, today we ask, what do we read into this? And is Donald Trump serious about growing the US footprint? And if so, how might he go about it? Well, we're joined now by Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who also served as the US Ambassador to the UN. Mr. Bolton, thank you very much indeed for being with us. From what we're hearing, it does seem like Trump 2.0 could be a stunning departure from decades-old norms about territorial integrity. And I'd like to start by talking about Greenland, which is, of course, an autonomous Danish territory. Denmark is a longtime ally of the United States. It's a founding NATO member. Do you think there's a case here for the United States taking control of Greenland?
Well, let me say first, there is zero chance that the United States is going to use force to do that. And the way Trump approaches issues like this, especially in such a public fashion, leads people, unfortunately, to think that the whole idea is kind of bizarre. Let me just say, I looked at this question very carefully in 2019 when it first arose, when I was National Security Advisor, and the United States has long had significant security interest in Greenland. We go back to World War II, just as one example. Franklin Roosevelt put American military forces on Greenland at the invitation of the local government before Pearl Harbor, after the Danish government fell to the Nazis. Because of the importance of the North Atlantic convoys. In the Cold War, it was quite important. So there's a long history here. And how to resolve the current threats in the Arctic from Russia and China, especially as global warming results in more maritime passages through the Arctic Ocean, is serious not just for the United States, but for Canada and the entire NATO alliance. I think there are ways that we can have quiet conversations with Denmark and the home rule government in Greenland. I don't think it's appropriate to negotiate this in a football stadium under spotlights. And I think that quiet diplomacy is the way to go here, because I do think this serious issue needs serious consideration.
Okay, so it sounds like you don't entirely agree with the means, but do you agree with the end goal, which is, did you conclude in 2019 that, yes, indeed, the United States should acquire Greenland?
Well, we didn't get to that point because Trump blew the negotiations up. We hadn't even really started by talking about it publicly and putting the government of Denmark, democratically elected government of Denmark, in an impossible political position. This is not how you negotiate with friends and allies. It's one thing to send a signal to the Chinese and the Russians, but you don't put friends in a corner up against the wall. Look, I'd be satisfied ultimately with full American sovereignty over Greenland. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's important, as my former boss, Jim Baker, used to tell me all the time, keep your eyes on the prize. The prize here is security for the United States and its treaty allies, including Denmark. It's not necessarily sovereignty. We have an existing bilateral treaty with Denmark, the Defense of Greenland Treaty from 1951, that could be a vehicle. I think there are many possibilities here, but it's a sensitive subject, as people I'm sure can understand, and the way you deal with subjects like that is privately.
Okay, another sensitive subject, the Panama Canal. What do you make of what Donald Trump's been saying about that?
Well, again, there's not going to be any force used against the Panama Canal. It's so typically the case. Trump takes an issue where there's a grain of importance in what he's saying, and you lose sight of the real focus because of his bizarre approach. Panama Canal is vital for American national and economic security, and really for world trade and economic prosperity in troubled times. I think many Americans, many people around the world, are concerned by the Chinese effort to gain control of sensitive port facilities and sensitive maritime locations like the operation of the Panama Canal. I do think there are issues with what China is up to, and I do think that it's legitimate for the United States and others who depend on the canal to raise this with the Panamanian government. That's what we should do, again, privately, quietly. And just make sure that Chinese operators, Chinese involvement, which should be minimal to begin with, does not pose a threat.
Former U.S. ambassador to Panama, who you may know, John Feely, told U.S. media that taking back the Panama Canal would require a war. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, it would require steps the United States is not going to take. This is Trump blowing steam and trying to confuse people. His supporters say this is good negotiation technique. I think it's bad negotiation technique. You don't put the government of Panama in this kind of trouble. Look, last week, the president of Panama said he wanted to work with the United States to cut off the flow of illegal immigration from South America, people walking through Panama to get to the Rio Grande border between the U.S. and Mexico. He said that America's natural border is the Darien Gap. And for Donald Trump, who thinks illegal immigration is one of his biggest priorities, this is a statement, really remarkable statement by the president of Panama that showed a willingness to work with us to address the problem of illegal immigration. I hope Trump hasn't blown that up as well. It's one thing to be the center of attention, which Donald Trump always likes to be. It's something else to accomplish your objectives, and you shouldn't let your self-esteem get in the way of getting those objectives. Again, keep your eyes on the prize. Let's work with Panama on this Chinese operator question. I think we can resolve it.
No doubt, Beijing and Moscow taking a very keen interest in everything that's being said by the president-elect. We've heard the Kremlin saying that President Putin is open to talks with Donald Trump. Do you think those talks will be productive? And is that something you'd advise him to do? Were you still his national security advisor?
Well, I'd be very worried because I think the talks are likely to focus on Ukraine, and I'm concerned about what the Trump administration policy toward Ukraine will be. I have to say, Trump's remarks on Greenland and Panama, saying he wouldn't rule out the use of force to achieve America's objectives, play into the hands of the likes of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping could say, well, you know, Taiwan is important for our national security, and I don't rule out the use of force there either. It's another demonstration Trump doesn't think of the broader consequences of what he says. In this case, very harmful to the interest of America and some of its best allies.
Some people are saying we're seeing a much more emboldened Donald Trump than we did when he first took office back in 2017. Some are calling this the no restraints maximum Trump, and of course with Elon Musk at his side. What does all of this tell us about how the next 4 years could unfold, Mr. Bolton?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily extrapolate from these kinds of remarks. Trump is famous for talking and then not following through. He's going to have a lot on his plate, starting on Inauguration Day when he tries a massive campaign to expel illegal immigrants from the country. We'll see how that goes. I think it's a lot less clear what's going to happen than some people are projecting, but I do think the second term is likely to be a roller coaster ride domestically and internationally, much like the first Trump term. He does not have a philosophy. He does not do grand strategy on national security. He doesn't do policy as we normally understand that term. His decisions are transactional, anecdotal, ad hoc. And that leads to continued uncertainty. It's bad for America's friends. The only hope I have is it's even worse for our enemies.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about this new, some are calling it a new sort of imperialist agenda there by Donald Trump, threatening to seize the Panama Canal and Greenland, perhaps by force, perhaps not, as we've been saying, threatening to use economic coercion to pressure Canada to become the 51st state of the United States. I mean, is there a coherent foreign policy plan here, a master plan, or do you get the impression that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are shooting from the hip?
There is no master plan. That's beyond Trump's capability. This is one thing after another. I think the motivating factor in the case of Canada is that Trump does not like Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, the outgoing prime minister. And in Trump's mind, and he said this publicly, he thinks that if he has good relations with the head of a foreign government, then the United States has good relations with that country. And vice versa. If relations are bad at a personal level, so are state-to-state relations. That's a gross oversimplification, but that's how Trump sees it. I'm not sure Trump can pronounce the word imperialist. That's not what's motivating his thinking. It's about publicity and comments that are being made to him by people who really don't have much of an understanding of the wider world.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're out of time. Appreciate that. John Bolton, former National Security Advisor and former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.